Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Baldwin's Retirement Ready series. I'm your host, Joe Much, an Associate Managing Director here at Baldwin Management. Joining me, as always, is Ben Meck, Deputy Managing Director of Accounting Services, who works directly with our clients on financial and retirement planning. Also with us is Matt Civitello, Deputy Managing Director of Tax Services, who specializes in navigating the tax side of the retirement. Gentlemen, a common question that myself and we here at Baldwin hear from our clients is, can I afford to retire? Now, at first glance, it seems like that's a question that should have a simple yes or no answer. But as we're going to discuss today, it's about a whole lot more than just hitting that specific dollar amount or magic number. We're going to walk through the major decisions that shape true retirement readiness, from turning your savings into income to planning for healthcare, family, taxes, and everything in between. At the end, we'll leave some time to go over any questions that you as the audience might have. So without wasting any time, let's jump right in. Ben, when someone asks, can I afford to retire? Why is that not just a quick math problem?
Um, that's a great question. So the numbers do matter, the math does matter. You just won't be able to start the conversation with a can I afford to retire and have a quick answer of yes or no. There isn't a flat number. You can't just say, oh yeah, well, save $1 million and you can retire. That's not the reality. Two different households with even holding the same assets could have a completely different yes or no answer because there will be different answers to the questions of what kind of housing situation do you have? What's your family makeup? Do you plan on traveling? Does anybody have any other health issues? Those are all follow-up questions that, as an advisor or financial planner, are going to be questions that come back to the client, or the person asking, "Can I afford to retire?"
Certainly, Ben. And I think too, another piece of it is, account balances and gross income do not equal spendable cash. I mean, there's definitely some tax optimization strategies that we've talked about, as well as some different options that people have from the buckets that they can pull from and kind of how they can get the cash flow that they need and as well as, master the timing. And I think that's a really big piece of it as well. So it's not just a number, certainly.
But it's not just one number.
Yeah.
It's a combination of numbers, and it's not a simple math question.
Right.
But it is a question that can have an answer.
Certainly.
Mhm. So I think it'd be worth saying that it's not just about how much you end up saving. It's about whether the resources and assets that you have saved up can support the life that you want to live in retirement.
Very much.
Exactly. Yep.
Good. Ben, most often retirement plans are created years before somebody's actually going to be retired, as they should be. You want to be thinking ahead on these things. Walk me through what kind of changes in a person or person's lives would should cause them to maybe take a fresh look at their financial plan.
Sure. So let's start with family being something that, essentially everybody has some version of it. Um, those changes aren't actually typically first seen with, a dollar value. So that'll be something that, somebody might pass away, or somebody will get married, or, you'll have another kid or grandkids or, cousins. There's all sorts of and then, close friends being another one of those like very similar variables in people's lives that, could cause a financial impact, but they aren't actually an upfront dollar figure variable that comes your way. But then when we get into those items that, are quickly associated with a dollar value, if you have a change in employment, you get a raise, or you get a promotion, or business closes. There are good and bads on both of those points that, we would want to revisit a plan. And then you get into, if you inherit something, and then, if you have any kind of money in the stock market, or any kind of investment, real estate or anything like that, there will be changes, maybe not constantly, and maybe not necessarily in the direction that you want, but whenever there is a change, typically once a plan is established and there's a baseline there, it's easy enough to put those changes into the plan to then say, okay, now what is my outlook looking like for retirement?
Matt, follow up to that, kind of in your wheelhouse. When that retirement or financial planning, when that timeline shifts, for instance, let's say somebody retires 2 years early or wants to retire 2 years early, from a tax perspective, what kind of ripple effects are we looking at?
Well, I think retirement as a whole is a big tax question. There's a lot of different items that kind of go into it. A few other things too that I think Ben, I forgot to mention was really like a move would be a big piece of it too. Like if you're moving
Yep.
from states, I mean, if you're maybe moving from Pennsylvania to another state down south, maybe there's tax.
Sell a house, buy a house.
Exactly. Or you want to live down the shore or something like that, or just live in a different place, maybe be closer to family. I mean, that's definitely something that is going to have a huge impact on the tax situation as well as really the age. I mean, there's some people that are, 70 years old that want to continue to work at well into their 80s and 90s if they can, and if they want to and they like doing that, go for it. Other people want to retire at 55 or even 50, maybe retire a little bit earlier. And if they have the assets and the timing situation and kind of the tax setup to do that, it can absolutely be a possibility. And uh, Ben also kind of mentioned about the sale of a business or even just phasing yourself out if you're a parent, maybe passing that on to the next generation. That's definitely something that should be taken into consideration. And I think it could be really optimized in a great way for taxes, as well as just having that cash flow year after year and really not having to maybe tap into investments. But it all kind of culminates together into the tax situation. And unfortunately, on the federal side, it's all the same across the 50 United States, but each state is very different when it comes to kind of what they tax in retirement and just the income and how it's all calculated. And some states don't even have state income tax. So it really is kind of a balancing act all across the board.
Mhm. So yeah, retirement planning, it's not really something that you do once and forget about it, like you
Right.
would maybe an index fund. It's something that's going to evolve and doesn't necessarily require constant updates. But as your life changes and new things, new expenses come into play or go out of play, it might be worthwhile to take a revisit of the plan and see how that's going to affect you, right? Ben, a common phrase that I hear with a lot of our clients is, having assets is the same as having retirement income. What does it actually mean when you turn your retirement portfolio into a paycheck?
It's a great question, because this is then also a question that does not have a universal answer for everybody. And it's important because you'll go from your earning stage of life where you're either getting a paycheck or you have a business, you have some control over the timing, or there's regularity in the timing of when you have cash inflow. So then when you get to retirement, you could have a wide variety of sources of assets, and your income then becomes the withdrawal of those assets from the savings vehicle that they're in. So in some cases, and for American citizens that are eligible for Social Security, that Social Security income almost feels like a paycheck because it'll be regular, predictable income that comes in. The other side is people who have pensions that also isn't very hard to feel like a paycheck because it's regular cash flow coming in. But then when we come to retirement accounts or brokerage accounts, those items, what you want to do is set up a plan for when you plan on spending your money and how often you plan on spending your money to be able to take it, locking in cash from one place and putting it into either your checking account where you're writing checks, or what you're paying your credit card bills out of, and then that's then feeling like you end up paying yourself to have that flow of positive cash to go against your flows of negative cash.
Matt, once somebody's in retirement and they're starting to pull from their different accounts, what kind of strategies do we see to make sure that we're not immediately handing over a big chunk of that paycheck, right back to the government in the form of income tax or capital gains tax.
So I think a big piece of it is just understanding and having that realization that we're going, most people are going from a W-2 job where they're getting paid every 2 weeks or however often the taxes are immediately taken out. You're kind of not necessarily feeling as much of that in retirement, even when you collect Social Security and certainly when you're taking distributions from your retirement accounts. I mean, there's really no withholding tax usually taken. Now, you can certainly set it up for any kind of distributions from a retirement account and Social Security. But from just the pure investments and capital gains aspect, there's not really withholding ever withheld. So it kind of comes down to us to make sure to optimize, hey, maybe some estimates, some quarterly estimates need to take effect, or even a higher frequency, or maybe just once a year. It kind of depends on what the client's looking for. And there's also a few other things to take into account. I mean, there's certain thresholds. IRMA, Medicare premiums are definitely a big one. You want to make sure kind of we're under that lowest amount, so we're not getting hit with extra Medicare premiums every year. But ultimately, I think it kind of comes down to each situation is different, and it truly is a timing game. I mean, there's definitely different buckets to pull from, traditional Roth and standard. And if you own a business as well, there could be some distributions to take through there, but it's definitely a balancing act, and there's definitely the right order to do it in, or a more tax advantageous order to do it in. And it kind of comes down to the situation, and each and every client's different.
Yeah, so just as important as building and accumulating those assets, once you get to the actual spending portion, it's about really trying to work the most tax efficient cash flow that's going to be able to support your retirement lifestyle, or what you envision to be your retirement lifestyle.
Absolutely.
So, Ben, another I guess heuristic I hear from individuals is simply just, I want to have just a certain percentage of what I'm making towards the end of my working career to just be what I'm going to live off of in retirement. I'll ask you, is that enough when you're just building your retirement budget?
It's a great starting point. And I think if you're coming into a financial planning endeavor, or a retirement planning endeavor, it's a great place to start the conversation. To then say, okay, when you retire, your entire lifestyle will be different. Um, so your daily routine is going to be different. There's a lot of people who keep a very similar routine where I get up every morning and I brush my teeth and then I go eat my breakfast and then I leave the house. Um, but where you're going when you leave the house is not going to be the same place that it was when you're going into retirement. So that your expense needs will change no matter what. And then there's other places where those the needs or wants for having cash to spend will change, whether it's your housing, your health care, whether you're traveling, what kind of hobbies you end up picking up or expanding upon, whether maybe you're a couple that downsizes from two cars to one car, because you both don't have a commute anymore, but then all of a sudden you have a mess of grandchildren, so you end up kind of you switch and you're not driving a sedan anymore. You have a maxi van with as many seats and DVD players as possible in the thing. I know I kind of dated myself there with that reference, but um, your expenses are different, and they can also be irregular. So you can't just say, oh, well, I'm good with 85% of what I make now because, the expenses are what they are. You can't just say that. It's important to have that as an idea to start with, but it's that, there's a lot of things to think about after that.
Matt, once people make that shift from working to retirement after a few months have passed, do you feel that anybody is surprised about what their actual take-home income is in that during that time period?
I think they are, and I mean, I think it's always a smart idea to plan with a tax strategy or at least a cash flow strategy that's after tax focused, because I mean, there are a few things in retirement that I'm sure are going to be generally different. I mean, hopefully, most people are toward the end of paying off their mortgage where they've already paid it off. So kind of that mortgage payment's not there. There's still going to be real estate taxes and insurance, obviously, but a lot of things that you had to pay for during your working years, it might be, a pretty big change. And one of the biggest things is ultimately taxes, I think, become a very, very large part, or if not the biggest expense, maybe one of the top three after maybe if there's still a mortgage, as well as, transportation or food and other things like that. But it's something that really needs to be taken into consideration. And just making sure that all your bases are covered. You're not coming up short, every single month. You want to make sure there's enough cash flow. It does take a little bit of discipline, but ultimately it shouldn't feel that different from when you were working, other than, your paycheck's kind of coming from somewhere different, quote unquote paycheck, and as well as, your taxes are being taken out quarterly or some other kind of schedules established. So,
Yeah, I think, the as we said, it's the percentage of your, last year of working income is a great starting point, but it's
Mhm.
probably not going to reflect your real life. It's not going to, you can't boil it down to necessarily one percentage point.
Certainly.
All right. More topical than ever, I would find in today's economy. Ben, family responsibilities don't just disappear when somebody retires. And what I've seen in a lot of the clients that I've worked with, you got to navigate things more now, like helping adult children, caring for aging parents, managing debt, and or your desire to potentially want to leave a legacy. With all these in mind, how's that going to affect the decision about whether somebody is truly ready to retire?
It affects it greatly. And I think, one of the things to kind of, think about here, we've talked about when are you earning, when are you, getting to your peak earning years, when are you starting to think about retirement, and then when are you, post-retirement and living your life. I think it's also important to kind of mention that and discuss that when you are going through these things, there's also your family life, and your lifestyle come into play a lot. It's the things that motivate me to go to work is my wife and taking care of my wife and kids. And so if you just kind of think about kind of generalizing, you spend a quarter of your life as a kid, depending on if you go through the normalized, hey, you pair up with somebody and you start to build a life together and go forth and multiply. You'll spend another quarter of your life as a parent, and then health and all other factors considered. The other half of your life, you're a grandparent, maybe even a great grandparent. And all the while, you might also have aging parents older than you, that are all people that you would like to take care of, or at least do what you can to make sure that they are able to live the life that they can. So those are very important. They're also very important places where you need to draw boundaries, based on what you're able to afford. There are conversations that you should have with all factors involved. Having conversations with your kids, having conversations with your parents before your mortality is inevitable, makes the conversations easier to have. And so it comes to a big effect of, what can you afford to do for the people around you? What kind of legacy can you afford to build, for yourself and for the people that are here after you? And so there are there's uh, points where you need to draw lines for, this is what I can provide to you, this is what I can provide to you, and then also building in the availability to, react to changes, is to say, okay, well, if this happens, we can also afford for this, but we would then have to sacrifice something else. And so these are all factors that when you're coming into a conversation, to have all these things coming into play. And this is why the planning conversation isn't just a one-time hour-long conversation. It's great to build a baseline and then say, okay, well, now what happens if this happens? Now what happens with this happens? And then when I talk to my kids, what can I tell them that they're getting out of me, before, they're just left guessing, after I pass away.
Matt, let's focus in on that leaving a legacy. because that is something that a lot of people are very interested in, and it's one of the more important aspects of their financial plan. There's a lot of planning and structure that goes into that. How do we or recommend, discuss, or plan for, those specific structures so that, the money can actually go to the family and not necessarily a huge chunk of it can go to the government?
So there's definitely a few different items. I mean, it's the biggest thing is making sure that we have these kind of buckets established of, traditional Roth and standard, as well as kind of looking at the whole tax picture to make sure, I mean, hopefully closer to earlier retirement or whenever, an individual or a couple retires, they kind of get a pretty good handle on the tax situation. And then ultimately it's just kind of adding and subtracting, making sure that, everybody understands, obviously with more income, there inevitably most likely will be more tax. But a piece of that is RMDs. Obviously, we talked about for required minimum distributions, and these are kind of things that the government forces people to take from traditional accounts, um, especially when it comes to kind of donations and giving charitably. You can kind of turn these, mandatory distributions that the government is requiring you to take into QCDs, which are, qualified charitable distributions, and that's something where you're kind of making the move where the government's telling you to take the money out and you kind of push it into your favorite charity. And it kind of helps. It certainly helps on the tax side. It certainly, helps lower your income a little bit. I think also a lot of estate planning decisions can come into effect, and I think Ben did a great job touching on it. It's not just necessarily linearly down anymore. It is also up and looking at aging parents or parents aging in place. I think that has to be something that gets taken into consideration because the last thing, I would want to happen is for a couple to be, kind of managing up and down, and then all of a sudden they're running a little bit low, or maybe they can't do what they wanted to do in retirement, and it feels different for them. It doesn't feel as satisfying as they thought it would. Because obviously you've worked all these years, you want to be able to retire and enjoy life and kind of do at least most of the things on the bucket list before the end. I put it akin to a great message I always think about is when you're on the airplane and the oxygen masks fall down, they always say, "Oh, put yours on first before kind of putting anybody else's on or helping your kids, your spouse with it." So I think that's a great analogy for retirement is like you kind of have to make sure you're on very stable and ground foundation before you're helping up or down, family and friends and all that. So definitely some tax strategies to put into place, but ultimately, I think again, it kind of comes down to everybody's, situation's different, but definitely some optimization strategies and some good tactics to use.
Matt, I wanted to use the word heuristic twice today, and that was going to be my exact use of it, the plain oxygen mask. So thank you. So
Absolutely. I
to
read your
truly
mind.
support, yeah, so to truly support the people, causes, organizations that you love, it's always important to make sure that your retirement plan is financially sound first.
Right.
All right. Let's take a little step back and look more big picture to close this out. Markets change, life changes, unexpected expenses are going to pop up at one point. Then the flexibility of a retirement plan, how important it is, how important do you feel that it is to have a flexible plan so that you're able to handle these situations?
It's very important. And I think, to kind of treat this as there's some ways to look at this where you treat your retirement plan like it's a trip itinerary. You can do that, and you say, "Hey, I want to do this. They have different destinations I want to get to," and that sort of thing. That's one way to look at it. I think the other way to look at it is a planned fire drill. The worst time to plan for a fire drill is in the middle of a fire. So we want to have these exit. Your exits are your core lifestyle needs that need to be covered, and making sure that you have clear paths to having those available to you. So that's where risk management in your investments comes into play. Depending on what you're interested in being invested in, that's where all the conversation becomes very personal, because we want to make sure that what you need is covered, food, water, and shelter needs. And then From there, having your adjustable goals or wants, labeled clearly for what are your priorities. And it's important, these are things that having a third party advisor, even if you're meeting with them irregularly, just having a third party person available to help you organize your thoughts and feelings on these is very important, because what really solidifies it is having these, your ability to say, hey, my needs are covered, and then to say, okay, well, best case scenario, all of your wants are covered. But then also knowing that, well, if something bad happens, I can do this, or if something really good happens, you're like, oh, well, this is, something, I always planned on doing this exotic trip, and well, all of a sudden, one of my investments, I was able to sell it for the, crazy gain. Now I can go do this trip. Well, if you've already kind of established that, these are, my pie in the sky dreams, and then these are the things I want to just be able to do, but I can also live with not doing them, depending on what's going on. That is very important to establish, and that's what really gives that strength to the plan to say, oh, I actually have, this ability to adjust. I have the ability to call an audible. I have this ability to pick the different stairwell, because I've talked about what I need and what I want.
Matt, any final thoughts on where people might find a little extra wiggle room on your side of the ledger?
Certainly, and just to kind of say too, I mean, obviously markets will go up and down, and no one knows which way they're going some days. But at the end of the day, I mean, taxes are pretty straightforward and hopefully pretty stable and sound for at least at this point. It comes down to, again, having those buckets, having traditional Roth standard, and just making sure that you're pulling from the right ones at the right times. And, you know, from the business owners, making sure they're phasing out and having succession plans and estate planning as a whole for the family. It kind of all culminates together. I mean, it's kind of tax planning, investment planning, and financial planning in general. Just it's all kind of the same beast. And there's definitely going to be some emotional questions that come into it. There's definitely going to be conversations about mortality. But at the end of the day, spelling all that stuff out way before it is incredible. And I think it's the only way to kind of do this the right way. So I think, Ben definitely, he said it right. I mean, having the fire drill before the fire is the best goal. So if we're planning financially, we're setting everything up to make sure that, everyone's good. They can give as much as they want. They can have the lifestyle they want. They can, provide more for their family up and down. I mean, it's kind of a culmination of everything, and making sure that certainly the government is happy and taxes are paid and all that. Then I think you've achieved everything any client would want to achieve.
I just want to reiterate, an important point to adding resilience to your plan is use all of your resources available. And a lot of the time, those resources are some kind of asset, or, have some kind of dollar figure attached. But the subjective assets that you have and resources that you have available are your advisors and, people who understand, your advisors and tools and people who understand what's going on. Use all of the resources that you have available to feel comfortable. A plan doesn't have to all come down to a single person, trying to do the math themselves. You're finding this webinar either live or a recording. We want to be a resource for you. And so by coming and talking to somebody about, your needs and wants, that's a step in the right direction towards, your resilience and ability to react to changes. And also making sure that when you have a tax guy or you have a finance guy, talk to them before you make decisions.
Yeah.
Then when you're talking about strategy before a decision is locked in, there's a lot more ability to throw the tips and tricks at what's the optimal way to get something to happen.
Well, that's great. Thank you both. I think there's one message that we can take away from all this today. It's that, retirement, your plan, whether or not you can, it's not going to be defined by a single account balance. Understanding how your savings, income sources, taxing, spending needs, legacy, desires, they all work together and to try to fit to build your plan. Now, I said at the beginning, we're going to take some time to answer some of the questions from the audience. And we do have one. I think it is for you, Matt.
All
Do
right.
the do the state residency requirements affect retirement decisions?
I mean, I certainly think they should be a factor. I give you an example of certainly if you're living in, let's say, a northeastern state like Pennsylvania, New York, and you wanted to move to Florida to be with family, I'd say move to Florida and be with family. And obviously, that's a favorable tax adjustment down to a state with no income tax, and it sounds like lower property taxes of late. But it really kind of depends where some of the money is being pulled from. Some states tax different retirement accounts and distributions differently. Some states tax Social Security differently. But at the end of the day, I mean, I think it ultimately comes down to where do you really want to be? It's more of a lifestyle choice, I think, than oh, don't go live in that state because it's a high tax state. I mean, if you've always had a dream of living in Hawaii or California, but you've lived in Texas your whole life, it's one of those things that you might have to just do it to check off the bucket list item and enjoy it and take the tax consequences as they come due. But ultimately knowing about them beforehand, I think is always the best course of action, or at least an optimal course of action.
Let's stay on that word residency and just shorten it to residence.
Yeah.
A big concern or a big question that I get asked is, should my mortgage be paid off before I retire?
It doesn't have to be, but I think it certainly helps. I definitely want Ben's opinion on this as well, but I think if you're close to paying off your mortgage before you retire, I don't ever think that's a bad idea. Going into retirement with the least amount of debt is usually a good idea. It's usually advantageous. Um, from a tax perspective, I mean, really, if you're towards the end of the mortgage and you're really only writing off mortgage interest, you still get to write off your real estate taxes even after you've paid off the mortgage. It might not be a total flop or a big, difference in income or a difference in deduction. So, I guess in my mind, I'd almost rather see someone, go ahead and pay it off if you have the means and the timing's right. Also, if you're looking to move, it might make sense to pay off the house and then, sell that, move somewhere else. It might be a bigger gain. Depends on, then you kind of run into some capital gains issues maybe, but ultimately, hopefully with the exclusions, you don't. So again, very specialized and certainly a topic that I love when clients call on the phone and say, hey, I'm looking at moving. I have this house here. I'm 25 years into the mortgage. What should I do? What's the best course of action? I think we just take a look at the whole situation and then make a decision together from there. But I love being on the front end of that, other than I don't like necessarily the calls when somebody says, hey, I just sold my house. What do I do? And I'm like, whoa, 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 wait a minute. There's going to be some stuff that we're going to have to deal with now, and it's less options and more kind of concrete. This is what needs to happen in this order. But Ben, what do you think about that?
I would just boil it down to it does not need to be paid off, but it needs to be planned for.
Yes, totally agree.
All right. We kind of talked about it a little bit. It's certainly with one more question. Well, it's certainly a big topic now, and I think it's just grown over the past couple of decades about that helping adult children and aging parents. As a lot of us know, things become more expensive, and medical advances, people are living longer. Ben, when it comes to helping out those children or parents, how do you do that without necessarily putting your own retirement at risk?
So have those conversations early with your children to have, hey, find out their wants and needs. So that you're not just thinking, oh, well, I want to give my kids $100,000, or I want to buy them a house, or I want to pay for their wedding. What if they don't want any of those things? Or what if they want all of those things? And helping guide them towards an affordable option for their needs and wants. Those are important conversations to have as they're growing, but then very much as you're getting into retirement, that it's a lot easier to have a conversation early to say this is what I can do for you, than to say avoid the conversation. Then all of a sudden, one of your kids is coming to you saying, "Hey, this happened to me, help." Now that will happen, so it's important to plan for that. But to have an open and honest conversation with your friends and family, the people who might be affected by your plan, that it's very important to have, because it makes it shortens the extremity of variables when it comes to what's actually happening.
Terrific. All right. I think that is all the time we have for today. I just want to say, Ben, Matt, thanks very much for joining. All of you watching live, watching the recording, thank you so much for joining us. It means a lot. Really hope that this discussion might give you a better way to think about how your retirement plan should work and what your retirement can look like. Not just about can you retire, but what kind of retirement are you planning for? I'll close by saying if you'd like to continue the conversation or discuss your own financial situation, we're more than happy to connect with you. At Baldwin, we specialize in investment management, comprehensive financial planning, as well as tax and accounting services. Again, thank you very much and have a wonderful day.